Here, if you want a good smoke, try one of these.
Right now in our country, there's an ongoing debate about the propriety of legalizing marijuana for recreational use. As a lawyer from Minnesota, I'm here to help facilitate that discussion a little bit by talking about the difference between legalization and decriminalization. Marijuana is very illegal in Minnesota, but it is also decriminalized. Many people don't know the difference. Now, this video is not intended in any way to promote or condone or otherwise, encourage the use of marijuana, as it is still an illegal substance. This is just for educational and analytical purposes and the facilitation of the ongoing debate over this very controversial subject. So stick with me and stay tuned. All right, so let's clear something up right away. Marijuana being decriminalized does not mean it's legal. And the people who are on the roster of people who misunderstand this include, oddly, judges, lawyers, police officers, politicians, and just about anybody. There's a misconception that decriminalizing means that something is somehow okay or that it's non-impactful. And that is on a spectrum. For each individual person who kind of misunderstands the term, it is on a spectrum from thinking it's fully legal because it's not criminal, down to, well, it's slightly illegal, but that doesn't have any impact on a normal person. Because if they get caught, well, it's no big deal, or police will ignore it, or any of the other misconceptions out there. But let's be very clear. In Minnesota, marijuana is still illegal, even though it has been decriminalized. Decriminalization isn't new. It actually occurred in Minnesota in about 1976, and we have the same regulatory guidelines for that decriminalization today that we did back then, although we've added a few clarifications just as new sort of emergent techniques and synthetics have come into the market. So let's clear this up quickly. Where is the law right now? In Minnesota, the decriminalized form and amount of marijuana is 42.5 grams of marijuana flower, that leafy green substance that you see. It looks kind of like oregano, right? That is the only decriminalized portion of marijuana. All right, so, and it's only 42.5 ounces or less. Any other form of marijuana, from synthetics like K2 or other types of drugs, to derivative substances like marijuana wax, honey, or oil, or even CBD style oils with a THC content greater than 0.3% concentration of THC. All of these are actually classified in the same way that many of the other drugs are. Like heroin or cocaine or whatever. They're on a schedule of controlled substances in Minnesota. Marijuana, in its flowery form, under 42.5 grams, is the only decriminalized portion, okay? Let's get that out there very clearly. If you're walking around with a little vape pen cartridge or something like that, in Minnesota, that is a felony possession charge. It is not decriminalized in any sense. If you're walking around with more than 42.5 grams, or even a small block of resin or something like that, or wax, like I said, those are also felony charges. You cannot have anything other than less than 42.5 grams of flowery marijuana. Now, that said, you also can't have less than 42.5 grams of flowery marijuana. This is where some of the confusion comes in. That decriminalization amount doesn't mean that you're able to have it, able to consume it, transport it, sell it, transfer it, anything like that. No. quite the opposite. You are not allowed to have it, and you are not allowed to use it. And if you are caught with it in your possession, even as little as one joint, a half joint, a little bit less, it depends on the police officer's mood, but any amount of marijuana is actually unlawful in Minnesota, in the same way that speeding is unlawful in Minnesota. This is actually, I've found to be a very useful analogy to tell people how this works out. Look, if you're driving down the highway and you're at the speed limit sign, you're fine as far as speeding goes. But if you're even 1 mile per hour over that limit, you're technically in violation of the law. Being even 1 mile per hour over the limit will allow you to get into an interaction with an officer that you otherwise might not have had. If you think of marijuana in the terms of a speed limit, the speed limit is 0 grams of marijuana, and the punishment for said violation is very similar to a speeding ticket, something called a petty misdemeanor. This is what's considered a non-criminal, or sometimes called a civil offense. It's an offense against the state, but it isn't something that is criminal and stays around on your record. They do fall off after some amount of time, and they don't tend to have a large impact on the surface. But remember, do you like getting speeding tickets? I know I don't. It's the same sort of thing. It involves going in, having to answer for that violation of the law, and oftentimes paying a fine. Now, as with a speeding ticket, a stop for possession or sale of a small amount of marijuana, that's actually the legal term. Small amount means 42.5 grams or less. A small amount of marijuana possession or sales encounter with a police officer will often involve a series of questions, confiscation of the contraband, and some sort of citation to appear for your non-criminal offense. You feel very non-criminal. You just don't get arrested, right? That's kind of the big difference here. However, that possession can lead to a search. If you have some marijuana, you might have more marijuana. Now, with a speeding ticket, you tend to have to do something extra. You have to trigger some alarm bell to get a search of your vehicle out of some small interaction on the highway with a police officer. With marijuana, it's kind of similar, although your obvious possession of some amount would lead them to conclude that there might be more. There may in fact be a felony amount of marijuana on your person or in your possession. And this is where those interactions that otherwise don't need to occur between the police force and the citizenry do in fact occur. And this is where that whole mystery of this not impacting someone's life kind of goes out the window. If you have an encounter with a police officer and you are suddenly at greater danger of committing some other crime that you may not have been aware of, or that may not have had the opportunity to happen outside of that. Something like resisting arrest, failure to identify yourself, non-compliance with a lawful order. All of these things can come out of that interaction that didn't need to occur. This is where decriminalization gets to be a different animal than legalization in a very real way for people who don't have good experience with police officers. Now, I'm not going to go into the politics of all of that. You can find that anywhere else on the internet. You can find that in my other discussions on this channel. But that being said, this is an encounter with a police officer that otherwise would not occur. If marijuana were legal and you were walking down the street partaking, then a police officer would not otherwise stop you. Similar to the way a police officer doesn't stop someone if they're just smoking a cigarette or ripping a mean vape off their vape pen, right? If marijuana is fully legalized, that, in essence, shouldn't occur. But moving past that decriminalization thing, remember how when they say decriminal and I say decriminalized, and I talk about a petty misdemeanor not affecting you. Well, the interesting thing about the statute in Minnesota is that if you are convicted of that petty misdemeanor, you pay the ticket, they take away whatever marijuana you have in your possession, you now have a 2-year window where you are not allowed to possess any amount of marijuana. And if you do and receive a similar petty misdemeanor charge, that charge is accelerated to a misdemeanor charge, and it becomes officially a criminal offense. It's criminalized at that point. So this idea that decriminalization is even a stepping stone to legalization is a misnomer. It's simply a matter of scale of the offense and scale of the punishment. The same with driving. Up to a certain amount of miles per hour over the limit, you're still in the decriminalized aspect of just speeding, just driving over the posted limit. Once you get to a certain point, you enter reckless driving territory, and your offense is escalated then, and there are other factors that can come into play at that point. It becomes more of a crime, and that more of a crime matters. With full legalization for recreational use, of course, we eliminate a lot of these things. This is why so many people are dissatisfied with the decriminalization that we've had in this state for a very long time. If your states are talking about decriminalization or legalization, as they are at the federal level and have been for the past couple years, talking about decriminalization or legalization, you have to know what that means, especially if you as a voter are going to make an educated decision. In summary, decriminalization does not mean, equate to, or even compare with legalization. Decriminalization is still an interaction with a police officer, still an interaction with the court system, still goes on your record, still involves a fine or other penalty, and can be escalated to a higher sort of punishment depending on the frequency of your non-criminal activity or the scale of the non-criminal activity exceeding into the criminal territory. So that's really all I wanted to convey, is to really break down the differences between decriminalization and legalization. Let people know that decriminalization has been around for a long time. So if marijuana doesn't feel legal to you now and hasn't felt legal and didn't feel legal to you 10 years ago or 5 years ago or 15 or 30 years ago, then it still is illegal. In Minnesota, it's definitely illegal federally. There's not even decriminalization at this point. And so I want to make sure people are aware of that difference. If it feels illegal in reference to marijuana, maybe not other things, it definitely is. No matter if they say it's decriminalized or not. The only way we're going to get around that is with the actual legalization for recreational use. And that will come with its own regulatory scheme that will bring marijuana somewhere along the lines of consuming cigarettes or alcohol or the other vices that are out there, right? But just go into the debate, the discussion, and your voting booths. Really, go into it with the education and guard against the often repeated idea of we can either decriminalize it or we already have decriminalized marijuana. We don't need to legalize it. If you're an advocate for legal marijuana, then you need to know the difference between these things and you need to be on guard for that argument. If you're opposed to legalization of marijuana, decriminalization may be an argument that you can entertain, understanding that decriminalized marijuana is still illegal, still unlawful, and still carries with it civil and eventual criminal penalties for offenders and repeat offenders. So go into that debate and that discussion and those voting booths with the education, with the understanding of the different terms that are being used, and also prepared to correct people, especially your politicians, when they get that information wrong. Thank you very much. This has been Rekieta Law, cannabis-splaining the interwebs. Again, this video is not intended to condone or promote the use of marijuana or any other illegal drug. Talk to an attorney in your jurisdiction to find out how legalization or decriminalization impacts you specifically, and go out there, enter that debate, and enter that voting booth, but do it in an educated way. Thanks for hanging out with me tonight. Have a good night. Peace.